So here we go with the Daily Politics updated guide to renegotiation in Europe. Sense of déjà vu all over again, anyone? David Cameron has been conducting sideline negotiations at the EU summit on the migrant crisis. But between May and June, the Prime Minister visited most other EU leaders before officially launching negotiations at the end of June. Talks may have kicked off, kind of, but there's been frustration in Brussels that he perceived lack of detailed demands and concessions from the Prime Minister. On Wednesday, the EU Parliament President, he's called Martin Schulz, called for clarity from Britain. And the Commission President, he's called Jean-Claude Juncker, told MPs that it takes two to tango and our British friends have to dance. It's clearly not seen strictly. In the last week, it has been reported that David Cameron wants to set out 4 key areas of reform. Here they are: increasing competitiveness, a 4-year waiting period on migrant benefits, protecting Britain from Eurozone integration, we're not part of the Eurozone of course, and greater powers for national parliaments. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that these areas would be set out in more detail sometime next month, maybe early next month, in a letter to the European Council President Donald Tusk, with the hope that negotiations can be speeded up in the run-up to the December Council. It's a big European summit. This is what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday on his way into that summit.
It's going well. The bill for our referendum is passed through the Commons. It's now in the House of Lords. The pace will now quicken, and I'll be again setting out the 4 vital areas where we need change, laying down what those changes will be at the start of November, so we quicken the pace and quicker those negotiations in the run-up to the December Council. But I'm confident we can get a good deal for Britain, we can fix those things that need to be fixed, and I'm confident that this process is well underway and making good progress.
Well, that was the Prime Minister yesterday saying a lot, or at least taking time to say a lot. What he actually said, I'm not so sure. Anyway, let's go to Brussels. We're joined by Ryan Heath. He's the Chief EU Correspondent for Politico Europe. Welcome back to the programme. It's good to have you. Are we right in thinking that Brussels, the Commission, other European leaders have pushed Mr Cameron into having to be more explicit about what he wants sooner than he wanted?
I think that's absolutely correct. I think it's probably in Cameron's own interest, if I'm reading the mood correctly here in Brussels. People were getting a little bit frustrated. They want to help him, that's a genuine feeling, but they also feel like he's kind of artificially constructed this referendum, that he's put himself in his own hole. So they're not willing to write a blank check, and they're not willing to sort of be strung along for months and months and months. So they really did put on a full court press this week to make sure he made a commitment like this, and he's done it. And so I think they're smiling here in Brussels, and I think it will help Mr Cameron in the end as well.
And although he's yet to flesh out all the details, they have a rough idea of the 4 main areas that he wants progress. Is there any indication yet if the rest of Europe is minded to give him anything like what he wants?
I think so. Like, if he's able to narrow it down into the concept of having a 2-speed or a multi-speed Europe, where David Cameron and I think many British people simply don't want to be on a path of endless integration. They don't want to join the Eurozone, and we're starting to see that 2-speed Europe emerge. So if that can be formalized through some form of protocol or sort of committed to in the lead up to a future treaty change, then that's something they'll be able to get on board with. I think David Cameron's always been a big supporter of the single market, and that's something a lot of the other countries here want as well, because it's a bit of a dirty secret, frankly, that the single market doesn't exist in more than 50% of the economy. If you can put it in a truck, there's a single market for it. But if it's a service or some kind of intangible digital product, that doesn't exist yet. So I think there's common ground there. But what is certainly clear is there's not going to be any kind of treaty change. So I think your viewers need to be prepared for that. If anyone's running around thinking a treaty change is going to be on the cards, that's simply not going to happen.
Okay, we've told them to stop running around if they think that. Ryan, thanks for joining us again, for marking our card once more. Now, we did ask for an interview with the Europe Minister. He's called David Lidington, not Livington, that was someone else. But he wasn't available. You'll find this as a pattern of government ministers through this programme. We've been joined, however, by the Conservative Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the new Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Crispin Blunt. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Why has the Prime Minister been so reluctant to tell us what it is he wants from Europe?
Well, he's got to balance the examination of what he's asking for at home, and if he presents to clear a list, any difficulties he then has in the subsequent negotiations will obviously be represented as failure. And it's going to be extremely important that he is able, if he's going to carry the referendum comfortably, he's going to have to come back with a success. And so the definition of success and the definition of failure, and as it's presented particularly by the sceptics in Parliament and in the media, are going to partly create the environment in which this referendum is launched.
But it now looks like he's being forced earlier than he hoped to tell us what it is he's looking for.
He was always going to be forced at some point.
Well, December we thought for the summit. Now
Well,
it's gonna
I
be
think
next month.
if he's able to narrow this to a letter to Donald Tusk in November, leading into a summit a month later, and if he gets a result at the December summit in terms of a draft protocol, that I think it's probably the best thing he's going to get. That this is a protocol that people will promise to sign up to the next time there are treaty changes. That's really as good as he's going to get. Then that's probably about as an effective way he's going to have of managing this.
We've got a rough idea of the general areas. We heard them there from Ryan. The Sunday Telegraph story last weekend looks to be pretty accurate, and is a general statement of the four things he's looking for. If he was to get all these things, would that be enough for the bulk of his backbenchers?
No, I don't think so. I think clearly I would probably expect the majority of colleagues were sitting in the middle waiting for the results of the renegotiation.
Right. And supposing he was to get, it's a big if, but if he was to get all this, would that middle of the party go with them, or would they be unhappy?
Well, people are going to have to take a view. In the first sense, whatever he gets is probably going to be unbankable. It is not a treaty change. It will be a promise of a treaty change.
How's that going to go down?
Well, then anyone who is then doesn't think it's enough is going to say this is not enough. It's not bankable. It doesn't commit. This is not a commitment by that is going.
No,
to
we have to take it as a promissory note, and there will then be talk. I've heard it already, of a second referendum.
Well,
I mean, we can't wait for that.
well, I think if the referendum decision is really clear, and you would only have possibly a case for a second referendum if the commitment entered into by all the European leaders at the December Council were then ripped up and reneged on totally. I think they would then have a
look
case.
at what he said.
But all of this is going to be in the margin of the detail about what it actually means in terms of
look at what he
competition
wants.
law and the rest.
He wants an explicit statement that Britain will be kept out of any moves to a superstate.
Well, that's easy.
That's easy, because that's the status quo. If there's any negotiation,
Well,
if there's any move to a superstate, it will be within the Eurozone.
Therefore, ever closer union, ever closer union will be taken out. We promise to be taken out of the treaty.
That doesn't change anything. He wants an explicit statement the euro's not the official currency of the EU. That's the status quo. The euro is not the official currency of the whole EU.
But the really important element there is what's going to happen to the European Union over the next 20 years. This is what my committee is going to have a look at this alongside the Treasury Committee. But the centripetal forces of the Eurozone countries within the EU are bound to exert, they're going to have fiscal consolidation to sustain the euro in future.
Sure, so what does it mean for the rest?
For the non-euro countries? And the detail here is going to be really interesting as to how he actually protects
and that
the position.
will not be resolved by 2017.
Well, we're going to have to see what's in the protocol.
Well, but
And that's the big issue here, Andrew. Does the protocol, will it produce the detail to say actually how you protect the position of the non-euro countries?
But you and I both know why it won't be resolved by 2017, because President Hollande and Chancellor Merkel both face elections in 2017, and neither of them want any talk of treaty change before that.
Well, this will be a promise to treaty change in the protocol. The issue is whether that is bankable and what detail there is in the protocol about exactly how the interests of the non-euro states will be protected going forward.
And this red card system, this that he's talking about to bring powers from Brussels to Britain, unwanted directives, this isn't a red card just for the British Parliament. It would only work, as I understand he's proposing it, because it's the only way he'd get it through, is it would need to be a group of parliaments that landed the red card. Britain alone couldn't put a red card on a directive.
Yeah, I wish him good luck
Correct?
with that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, this begins to make what Harold Wilson achieved in 1975 monumental.
Well, that's
and he achieved nothing.
That's why I hope the work the select committees are doing on this is actually going to be relevant. My committee is going
So
to
a plug for your select
It
committees.
is, absolutely. Well, why not? My select committee is going to look at the costs and benefits of staying or leaving around the implications for Britain's role in the world. Bill Cash's committee, the European Scrutiny Committee, he's going to chase the renegotiation and look at the detail, exactly all the stuff you're raising
we
there.
can all hardly wait for that.
And the Treasury Committee will look at the economic implications. Okay. We want to try and get in a place where we can present to the public a balanced analysis of what the implications are of what it means to stay and what it means to go, and that's the decision.
And that will be that bit will be useful for the debate. Is there not a danger that the Prime Minister is losing control of this process?
Do you know, I think the danger is that the audience is going to be bored to death by discussions like this one.
Not our audience. They love this.
Really?
Oh, they want 2 hours.
The trouble with discussions of this kind is that you have to know what is going on in Europe before you can decide whether or not the Prime Minister's got a good deal. But as soon as you start talking about the detail, it becomes so impossibly hard to follow unless you're somebody who sits and studies details of EU treaties.
So are you impressed by the list of the Prime Minister's supposed demands?
Well, no, because it's so incredibly vague. I mean, as you say, if he comes back and says, victory in Europe, I have got an agreement that we don't have to join the Eurozone and that we don't have to take part in ever closer union. It just makes people will just think, was that a danger in the first place? Why are we in this wretched organisation? So somehow people have got to start discussing this in ways that mean something to people at home. If you're going to talk about this in terms of, are we going to have control over our borders? Are we going to have control over the wasteful spending in the EU? Then that is going to mean something to people. But at the moment, the whole thing sounds like a lot of fluff. And I'm told that Downing Street is actually beginning to panic slightly, that they think they are failing to come up with anything that is going to make sense to the audience.
That will resonate.
Yes, you've got to cut through to people. Why do we care in our daily lives, one way or another?
If England was to vote to leave in the referendum and Scotland was to vote to stay, Ms Sturgeon has indicated that that could trigger a second referendum. But what would happen if the polls showed that you were still in a minority wanting independence?
I think she's been quite clear, and one of the things that she said at this conference...
Quite clear for me is a red light, meaning I'm about to be covered in mud.
Is that public opinion and is going to be very important to her, and she'll be very explicit about that. So just the scenario you were painting about Europe, which is interesting, in the last few months it seems to me polls have narrowed in terms of the UK, but at the same time they've diverged in Scotland. There's a bigger majority to stay in than there's ever been. But that wouldn't in itself, from my reading of what Nicola Sturgeon is saying, be sufficient. It's public opinion for independence.
So that's a change, because the SNP
important.
used to say if the two countries voted differently in a European referendum, that would trigger another referendum.
It's not automatic trigger. I mean, I think the reality is actually it wouldn't just be the SNP saying that. That would be such a fundamental change. People across the spectrum would be saying.
The polls, and then you'll have a referendum if you think you can win. If you don't think you can win, you won't have one.
The polls will be very important.
Very well. Just final point. Boris Johnson said yesterday that the downside of Brexit, of Britain leaving the EU, is not as big as many people think. What do you think?
Well, I agree with him. We're there's a lot of smoke and confusion about what the implications are. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this work with my committee, to actually look at the implications. And my view,
we got that. We got that your committee is going to be very busy.
There isn't a right answer here.
So
whether we stay, because people will have very strong views as to whether we should stay or whether we should leave. But overall, either choice has significant implications for the UK, both economically and for our role in the world.
And for the United Kingdom, if it triggers another referendum.
Indeed, it's not the only union on the line. I would agree with you. And people need to take this decision, knowing what the implications are. My view, as I've described it, at the moment I would leave kind of 7-5 after extra time is how I...
So could you? What does that mean? You would
leave?
leave?
My judgment is that on balance, just on balance, my choice would be to leave now.
Okay.
But I want to do the work to get as good a grip as I can, and something that is presentable to the public who are after all going to take this decision about the factors they should be looking at to take into account when they take that decision.
Crispin, I'm willing to take a bet that you're not going to change your mind. In my experience, all the sceptics who say I'm going to weigh up the evidence are actually intending not to shift position.
We will have you back.
Well, I hope my analysis has been correct to date.
We will have you back as the chairman of a powerful committee. We're going to have you back and see how it's progressing. But we have to leave it for the moment. Thank you.